Alrighty, good morning everybody, and welcome to the third installment of our Breakfast Smart series. This morning's presentation is on cybersecurity for small businesses. We know that many businesses are not large enough to warrant having an entire IT department, and some of you are the IT person, and the maintenance person, and the sales person, and all the other roles that make your business function. On that note, we will be recording this webinar and have it posted to our YouTube page in case you need to leave early or if you want to refer back to anything that we share. Before we get to our presentation, there are a few people that I would like to thank. Let's go in here. There we go. Thank you to MediaCom Business, our 2020 Breakfast Smart Series lead sponsor. They are sponsoring all 4 of these, so we appreciate that. We also have our supporting sponsors, the City of Coralville and Terry Lockridge and Dunn. Typically, these organizations would all be funding our coffee, but since we can't do that right now, they're funding our Zoom account. Speaking of Zoom, I did want to take a second to go over how we're going to take questions. So in order to ask a question during the webinar, there is a Q&A box down at the bottom. Submit your question through there, and then we'll let you know that we've received it and that we'll answer it once we get to that portion. You can ask questions at any time, but we'll answer them all at the end. Please make sure that you put them in the Q&A box and not the chat box so that we can keep track of them. Alrighty. Now that we've taken care of all of that stuff, I would like to introduce our speaker. Brandon Potter is the Chief Technology Officer of ProCircular, an information security and privacy firm focusing on mid-sized businesses. A former executive and practice manager at a cybersecurity startup, he spent more than 12 years working in IT and InfoSec. So I bet he can tell me what that means. Brandon is a certified information systems security professional, certified ethical hacker, and certified incident handler. In addition, Brandon has earned a Bachelor of Science in Computer Investigations and Network Security. Outside of ProCircular, Brandon seeks his repose through enriching time spent with family and friends, the highs and lows of Cubs baseball, and the unique pleasure in savoring a finely crafted bourbon. Take it away, Brandon.
Thank you very much, Emily. I appreciate that. We're just getting switched over on the slideshow. And we should be rocking if everybody can see the screen. Well, thank you for that fine introduction. If anybody caught on to that, the Cubs fan and the bourbon kind of go hand in hand depending on the season. So hopefully that does get a start up here soon with all the changes. But we really appreciate having the opportunity to present today, and we thank you guys for this opportunity, and I hope there's some fun takeaways from it. So without further ado, let's start talking about cybersecurity for small businesses. The standard slide, Emily did a much better job at explaining it than I would have, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. So in today's presentation, small and mid-sized businesses are really the bedrock of most of our economy, not even locally, but also nationally. So it's hard to have that pressure, especially during pandemics and really under public scrutiny. To boot, cyber attackers are battering small businesses at this point. So in today's presentation, we're going to cover why they target us, how do they target us, how they steal from us, more importantly, what are they stealing? And probably the most important takeaway from today's presentation, how can we either prevent and or respond to these attacks? So why do they target us? Given it's virtual, probably won't ask the crowd for reasons today. So if there is any other candid feedback or conversation, feel free to put it in the Q&A window. But we're going to start off with a couple bullets here. Small businesses really were not exactly IBM. Much smaller staff, sometimes even one individual. We're underserved here in the market from a professional or a MSP or managed security services provider market, right? It's hard. We might not have the funds to be able to engage those experts or all of the expertise. Quick technology adoption, tomorrow there's going to be some new technology and it's going to probably help our business in one way, but adopting that so quickly can absolutely introduce risks and increase our attack surface. Distributed risk, kind of taking that back to, we're not exactly IBM, but we have many, many, many roles and responsibilities, right? Staff wears multiple hats: marketing, sales, IT, more importantly, and also, you know, trying to increase your clients or your customers, or you know, build on your mission as a company and small business. Intellectual property, depending on our business, we might have that information that those attackers want. We'll talk about some ways they do kind of obtain that and how they're leveraging that and why that is such a primary target of why they do focus here. And more importantly, your clients. It's not just about you, it's about your clients and customers. This in turn provides more data and information, which really leads back to one of the primary motivators. That's that big stack of cash, everyone. This is frequently the biggest answer to why. Money, right? So how do they target us? I'm showing a screen here of a LinkedIn Sales Navigator search. This is commonly catered to not only legitimate purposes, but also attackers. We like to talk about this. This is really how they gain that information. That's open source intelligence gathering. This software right here is actually $79 a month. It'll tell you anything and everything about a company, including their employees, information about their employees, and to boot, it even shows connections. So who do you work with? Who might your clients be? What industries are you in? Publicly facing clients, right? Meet the richest person in every state. This one's from 2018, unfortunately, but I just like the way it's kind of put together. So if they're focusing on a specific area, such as the Midwest or Iowa more specifically, there's information out about that. If you've made the news about something, chances are it's piquing an attacker's interest. So what else and how do they steal from us? This is a screenshot of a very, very well-known and well-used website where people, myself, you as a business, might want to share some type of information, and more importantly, attackers. They can post data on here. So this is where dumps typically go of usernames and passwords, as I've highlighted here, but whether it's from a third-party site or a vendor, this is where things end up. And once it's on the internet, it's hard to get it off, right? And those attackers constantly look for this. How does this happen? Sharing is caring, everyone. Shared passwords, that website that, you know, maybe you ordered a cool pool floaty from some Facebook ad, maybe that site isn't as secure as they claim to be. And it might end up on a site or something similar like this. So tools of the trade, you know, how do they steal from us? You know, talking about open source intelligence gathering and a few other components, as a small business, customer service, very important. Good service sometimes does work against us though. We want to help the client. That's one of our #1 priorities, most likely. So they're going to call in and they're going to try to get as much information as possible, and they're going to prey on the ability to just be that humble Midwestern, right? The customer's always right. Let's do what we can to make them happy because we're here because they're working with us. Another way, in more recent times, with kind of remote work and companies with limited IT capability, they need to gain remote access to systems, right? They leverage what we like to call remote desktop or remote desktop connections. This has significantly increased since the pandemic. You know, nobody can go to the office to get to their systems. This is probably the easiest way and the fastest way to get remote access to your computer. And if you Google how to gain remote access to your computer, it's going to tell you about this. In short, this is bad, especially when combined with some other poor practices, but not necessarily maybe having that IT department. We need to get to certain things, and this is built into most computers in one form or another. We'll talk about a couple other ways, but more specifically, this in a more recent scenario that we did some incident response investigations for actually led to this. So remote desktop was used to gain access to an internal QuickBooks software. And if you guys and gals on the call can take a look, I've highlighted the bank account information, and the attacker actually leveraged that remote desktop protocol to get into the QuickBooks software that was on a small business network and change the banking information. So any money now coming in and or going out was now being routed to an alternate bank account. Adjusting the DDs, right, the bank accounts, funds diversion through fraud, that typical Western Union scam, right? Hey, my cousin's sick. I'm in Nigeria traveling. Can you help me out? I'm in a big, tough pinch. You know, I ran out of money. I was arrested. I need X dollars to get bailed out. Can you help me? Funny fact though, why do those Western Union scams always originate from Nigeria? Well, actually, there's a reason. Harvard released some information and some statistical analysis that was done. They leverage an opt-in approach. So rather than send 10 million emails out and get a bunch of responses, they actually ask individuals what they want to do and how many they want to send to make it more realistic to actually be able to run this scam operation. So limited resources, so they limit the amount of people that can actually call in. Another way they target us, phishing. This actually was a real phishing email that we received that appeared to go to our accounting firm that looks to come from our CEO, Mr. Aaron Warner. Hey, I'm traveling. It's actually local to the area. Could you pick up a bunch of these gift cards, and while you're at it, order it from here because I've already prepped it. So there's a lot of technological nefarious things going on behind the scenes here. Phishing is probably one of the #1 risks specifically for small business, right? We don't have some of the technological advances to detect this before it reaches our inbox. And let's be honest, some of them are pretty convincing anymore. Kind of another reason for phishing, right? Here's another phishing example. This goes back to wired fraud. More specifically, a risk on how they target us is that business email compromise. You're vulnerable to this, and it is a prevalent vector. It's receiving that email unsolicited to potentially mimic your finance or your financial third party that you leverage for payroll or partnerships about sending money. And you know, if we look at this on the screen here, there's some key indicators. Not only the typos, but more specifically, they're trying to get you to rush. Can you wire this today? I need it as soon as possible. And then they remind you of that. That's a big indicator that typically it's probably nefarious, especially if you're not really expecting that. Business email compromise can happen in a lot of ways. We'll talk about a couple more risks here shortly, but if those attackers gain access to your inbox, they can then go back and look at previously sent messages and actually originate authentic messages from inside of your email account itself to make them much more realistic. And 'tis the season, right? 2020. when and why we're going to be targeted is really going to be on those 3-day weekends. So they're great. We don't have to work on those 3-day weekends the majority of time. Well, maybe we do here and there. But this is really when those attackers are going to want to start focusing on these attacks. So we all love that time off, but not the attackers. They know banks are closed. It's going to give them much more time to potentially get more from you through a wire fraud scheme or the ACH or the DD account routing, mainly because those banks are closed that extra day. So it's really important to be extra diligent around this time. So what are they stealing? We kind of talked more from a money standpoint there with some techniques, but more importantly, your data is valuable to hackers. Payment and financial information we touched on briefly. That's probably one of the key components. Some other ones, access to your computers. The phishing emails or visiting malicious websites could install software or malware on your machine that provides the attackers remote access to it. Access to your computers actually goes for a decent price on the dark web. These initial infections, they can then be sold, and your computers can be used kind of with botnets or to further other attacks to help masquerade or hide that attacker's origination point. Assist with hacking other companies, more specifically, your customers. That information that's posted online, that research that's being done, that does create that risk here to give them a way to maybe even target you more specifically if you have the customers that they may have. Those really powerful individuals that we briefly looked at, maybe you do work for them as a small business. I mentioned intellectual property and designs. These are key, right? Small businesses have a very niche and unique approach to certain things and frequently work with those larger enterprises. And that intellectual property and those design plans really help. Ordering patterns. It might not be to infect your computer to steal things, right? It might be to figure out when your highs and lows of the business are if you're a small business manufacturer, to really get that investing intel to not only use for themselves to increase their money or their purchases, but also to sell that investing intel to parties that want to do that, or more importantly, your competitors. When are you succeeding? Why are you succeeding? How much are you investing? Where are you putting your money? And what are you purchasing for those upcoming months? And then obviously your information and your client's information, right? False tax returns, that was big here a few months ago, and as things kind of still go, is still pretty prevalent. That sensitive information that may be stored on your computer for yourself, or maybe your smaller accounting firms, the one individuals, they come after you for your client information so you can so they can file those false tax returns and gain access to information that way. And even more recently, an uptick in medical records, right? This information can help not only with targeting, but is also quite beneficial on the dark web to sell for many, many reasons. So what we have here is, well, where does that information go? How do the attackers get it? Where do they post it? And how much does it go for, right? So what we have here is one of the more popular black markets. In recent past, this typically goes live on the internet and then gets taken down and then comes back up as another name or somewhere else in a different country. But what we have here is actually some credit card information. As you can see, is big blocks of credit cards, and they're selling them for $10.99 per credit card at this point. Must be some very, very wealthy individuals or very, very high limits for 1099, as we've seen them go as low as like 30 cents per card when you buy them in bulk. Date of birth, social security numbers, driver's license. These are only going for about $2.50. So again, the same market, right? Medical information. This is all publicly accessible on the internet for purchase, right? You can even buy with Bitcoin, which is a very common currency for that undermarket. And then again, another popular one, if we look at the URL, everyone or most people might be familiar with kind of the Tor network or the dark web. It's kind of an anonymous way to browse the internet. Frequently, these are only accessible through there, but here we have more of that information of where does it go, right? It's very easy to find this information. So if you can imagine collecting this information from small businesses, large businesses, individuals even, it can turn a pretty penny here if you get enough data and sell it quick enough. And if you pay close attention here to the left side of that, this is actually a feedback component about what individuals bought, and there's star ratings. I probably personally wouldn't buy from the one that says 1 star, crappy service, sent me the same information I purchased the previous time. But this just shows the maturity of the organizations in this market and why it's done. They actually have live customer support chats on these websites as well. So if you're having trouble checking out, or if the information's not working, there's live chat support, just like your Amazon ordering systems. So kind of a unique view into the where does it go, right? So what are some cyber trends that are specific to small business, right? Threats, threats are becoming more sophisticated in general. According to the Ponemon Institute, for the fiscal year of 2019, the most recent one, 66% of small businesses have experienced a cyber attack, and 63% actually have classified that as a breach. So that intellectual property was stolen. Client information was stolen. Financial information was stolen, or the email account was compromised. By no surprise, ransomware, that's that malware that might encrypt your data and hold you hostage to try to pay for that. Give us, 100 Bitcoin and we'll give you the decryption keys so you can continue to operate as a business. And if you don't, as small businesses sometimes frequently do not have backups, your business may go under, and they leverage that and they pry and lean on that to make it more likely that you would pay them to get your data back. But in more recent times, specific to this year, ransomwares went one step further. They know backups work. Those attackers know that people are starting to back their data up. They're moving to copying that data before they encrypt it, and then using that as an extortion scheme to say, well, not only will we give your data back if you pay, but we'll also decrypt it. But if you don't, we're going to post this on those websites and sell your data. And so it's becoming much more targeted, and the price is much higher at this point with the extortion scheme. Email compromises, right? Spear phishing. They're getting craftier. Kind of to it's getting more personal, right? Email compromises, shared passwords. I'll talk about this in a couple more slides, but using that same password, not only for your work login or your personal email account, but also your corporate email account, significantly widens the gap and increases your risk of potential email compromise and exposure, which could then be leveraged to send more trustworthy looking emails to people in your contact list, or to get information to be able to conduct that wire fraud. or to leverage it to just damage reputation, right? Fileless malware is still a thing. Attackers are, becoming more sophisticated. They're not putting information on your computer as frequently. They're doing a lot of this with more technical means, which makes it much more difficult to detect, especially for the small businesses. Phishing's getting more personal. We're coming up to elections. We've got a lot of movements happening right now. Pandemics, political issues, those are all top of mind on us. Everybody has their opinions. Attackers know that. So they're going to target you specifically for that to get you to potentially click that email or to interact with them in one way or another. Donate this money. Go here and donate to our cause, please. And then when you enter that information, if it's a malicious email, now they have your credit card information or your bank account information that you just put in. And more importantly, public scrutiny. The public at this point looks at us as a small business compared to an IBM, and they look at us the same. You're operating. They're not looking at it from you have a lot of extra money to invest into cybersecurity, right? No, you're focused on growing your business and getting to the next step. Yes, it's on top of mind, but you don't have that capability. And there's actually been some studies released that show public scrutiny and reputational risk is just as big of a risk and likely to happen based off of a cybersecurity breach for small businesses as it is a large company at this point. Because a lot of society is now wanting to work more with small businesses and get into that, help the local economy, right? Especially right now with COVID, trying to help keep the doors open and things to that nature for the unfortunate circumstances. Public scrutiny can really, really damage reputation and even trust. And trust is a big thing in many, many lines of business. So I know what everybody's thinking. You may feel hopeless. You're like, what are we going to do? It feels like I'm rolling this big boulder up the hill and I'm just not making any progress, right? But there's good news. Advanced solutions are available. There's new technology and there's more and more of it, which drives the price down for the competitive edge. It's becoming much more affordable to get some of this technology. That antivirus software that you hear so much about that's supposed to protect you, it's getting much more advanced and sophisticated to where it's not looking at something specific, but it's analyzing the behavior more. So this is actually different than what I've seen, or this shouldn't happen because this is how your software or your system should be functioning. It's starting to detect that and starting to provide some more protections. Again, it's not foolproof, but it does help provide that layer. Better education, security trainings more readily available online. Communities such as ours are putting on webinars to educate the local community on better cybersecurity hygiene, better cybersecurity practices. That information's out there. We just want to be able to disseminate that. More importantly, small businesses care. Studies and many research recently show that small businesses are paying more closer attention to security than larger companies because it's starting to become, part of daily life. It's not something that we can get away from. Why? Because attackers know we don't have the security staff as IBM. It's a much easier target. But we're starting to care more. Cyber resilience, yeah, it's a buzzword. It's not just a buzzword. It's actually a thing. It'll really make sure you're more prepared. And this is those layers, right? And we'll talk more about that. And more importantly, it can help let you recover much more quickly from a cyber threat. Using those multiple layers, putting in antivirus, and doing a couple other things. And more importantly, third-party support from firms like, ProCircular, right? I'll do a brief plug there, but small local companies that have that expertise that you may be able to lean on. They're out there. They care about the community. There's a few of them around the area that do great work, but leverage them. That's the good news, is it's readily available to you. So what are some steps that you can do to defend your small business? Whether you're a 1-person shop, a 30-person shop, a 150-person shop, etc., all of these are going to apply. You know, backups, we've talked about those with ransomware. Regular backups, we're being serious about this. There's many ways to lose data. Ransomware, they don't care. They're going to send it no matter the large or small, because it's easy for them, and it's a pretty big payout in some instances. So regular backups, yes, there is the potential for them to threaten releasing your data and maybe posting it online. There are some groups that are known to do that. But these help so much. Not only is it going to minimize that opportunity to pay, but it's going to help you if the computer just happens to not turn on the next day. Yeah, that data will be back. Password management, and more importantly, 2FA. Weak passwords and shared credentials, using your Facebook password for your corporate email account or the login to your online QuickBooks portal is very common, and weak passwords as well. Those password data breaches, the attackers go find those, and then they find your email address or your usernames online using that open source intelligence gathering or things that have been posted from, you know, vendor breaches such as Equifax or Target. And then they go out and they're just going to test if those credentials work with those weak passwords. Chances are you're using a password that's been breached previously. And if you use it for multiple accounts, or they target your Facebook profile with those political ads or those groups of any sort, that gives them one next step to get in. So how do we fix that? Well, we leverage something like LastPass, which is a free password vault or manager software, which allows you to generate those random passwords and not have to remember them. So you can create unique passwords for each service. And more importantly, multi-factor or two-step verification. You're frequently probably seeing this as you log in. It's more important to turn these on where access to sensitive data, but it's good hygiene to do this all over. And this will either send you a text message, ask to send a voice call, or more importantly, you know, an app that gets put on your device that allows you to say, yes, I'm trying to log in, and or gives you that 6-digit code that changes every 30 to 45 seconds. Why this is important is if your password is breached, that attacker actually has to have that second form of authentication to still be able to gain access to your system. So it's really a good stopgap. Endpoint protection, right? And cyber hygiene, patching, and antivirus. As a small business, you might not have a ton of IT resources. That automatic update feature that hounds you all the time, that you have to click, no, remind me later, I'm in process of doing payroll or I'm doing research. Make sure that you actually use that feature, right? Don't wait too long. What this is those Microsofts and the Apples and the Googles for their web browsers and Mozilla Firefox and things to that nature, they're pushing out fixes for known security vulnerabilities that hackers are using to gain unauthorized access to systems. So if you can patch, that's going to give you some preventative protection against something being used that's known to be malicious, right? Antivirus, right? Use it, update it. Whether it's the Windows one that's on there for free, or whether it's something more sophisticated, again, that technology, the advancements are there, and it's becoming much, much, much more digestible from a cost standpoint for large and small businesses. Make sure that we have this on our systems, right? These seems like pretty basic steps, but the basics work, especially when used in a resilient or layered manner. Security awareness training. I mentioned it, these webinars that your community puts on, but if you can provide some tangible steps to yourself and or your smaller staff, train them on ways to spot phishing emails or policies. Hey, I'm never going to email you to request a wire transfer. I'm not going to email you to purchase gift cards. If you're not expecting an email, don't open it. Don't click that attachment. Don't go to the website to change your password, etc. And cyber hygiene, right? There's a ton of regulations out there depending on your business, whether you're large or small. Some are applicable and some are not. But the best way to address that is to look for some type of compliance framework adoption, right? And this will play into some of those third-party firms you may or may not want to look at. But NIST, the Center for Information Security, has released some guidelines that can help kind of check off that low-hanging fruit. Staff training, patching, proper password management, all of these are great starting points. Those frameworks, you can kind of do a risk assessment working with a third-party firm to really give you that one leg up, right? It's something you can do. It gives you a good idea. You get some recommendations out of it. Private internet access. This is a VPN solution. When you're on those public Wi-Fis or you're on there, leverage a VPN solution. They're pretty cheap. And what they do is they keep that information from prying eyes, and it makes it a little more secure for you to conduct that sensitive manner, that transaction, not only on your home Wi-Fi, but also those coffee shops, those hotels, and things to that nature, right? Cybersecurity insurance. Use this, please, and pay close attention to it. Seek out expertise if you have questions. At minimum, a cyber writer that's kind of included, but that will provide minimal protection. You really want to look at a specific cyber insurance plan because that will help in the event of a breach from a response effort and things to that nature. That will really help bounce back from that in not only, a financial way, but also from a timing standpoint to reduce that downtime, to reduce the time to engage those experts. Incident response planning. Hands down, the worst time to prepare for incident response is during a live incident when you're responding to something. So let's be diligent. Let's do that before, right? Scanning and regular assessments. I mentioned risk assessments and things to this. At least annually, work with someone to make sure that you're aligned with some type of best practice or that what you guys are doing is on par to the threats and the risks that are out there today. And I can't say this enough. I've touched on the phishing emails and I really focused on wire transfer a little bit at the beginning. Voice confirmation for wire transfers. As you have more staff and maybe multiple people in the financial department, that dual control where one person can submit for the wire transfer and the other can approve it. That's great, but work with your bank or your financial institution to make sure that you get voice confirmation for wire transfers. These emails, these attackers are much more personal, and it makes it very difficult without voice confirmation for large wire transfers. It's a good way to stop that. So what's the plan? Let's recap this, right? We want to back up, patch, and update our systems. We want to use strong passwords, reduce sharing passwords across different areas, and enable multi-factor or two-factor authentication where possible. Provide training resources to your employees, even if it's, once a year, that annual one, or some quarterly reminders. Work with, there's many softwares out there that can allow you to do automated phishing tests. And it'll really allow you to increase the chances that your team will detect those targeted phishing attacks. You know, ransomware, that's big, right? That is probably probably the top risk, even more so than business email compromise and wire fraud or fraudulent financial transactions, to small businesses specifically. Verbally confirm those wires and engage with experts for preparations, that ongoing scanning and assessment work, incident response, being able to leverage that, have that third party on call, on retainer at the ready. So if you do experience a breach, you have an expert to call. The longer you wait, the faster it spreads, the more damage it can do. The sooner you can respond in a timely manner, and with experts, much more likely you're going to bounce back with minimal public scrutiny and reputational risk, financial risk, and or data loss, right? Develop that cyber resilience. I know it's a lot to absorb. This is one of my favorite movies, and I love this quote. But you don't always have to be first in cybersecurity. Hackers take the path of least resistance for the most part. So really what we want to take away from this, just from a lighthearted standpoint, it's a lot. You really only need to be better or faster than the person directly behind you to stay away from that attacker, or in this instance, the bear that's chasing you down for that afternoon snack, right? And that's what I have. So again, I thank you for your time. I do believe we have some time left for some questions. So hopefully we have a few of them.
So just a reminder, if you do have some questions for Brandon, please put them in the Q&A box down in the bottom there. And while we wait for some to come through, I have a couple just from watching this because I've learned a bunch. So we talked a bunch about passwords, obviously the first line of defense, I guess. Aside from using a random string of characters, what makes an actually secure password? Because I'm pretty sure it's not the one capital letter, one number, one exclamation point, and you're done.
Yeah, that's a fun question. Most of the breached passwords are based on dictionary words. And what I mean by that is, I'll just use password, for example, right? Or spring, or summer, or winter, or fall. I think we can kind of get a pattern. They have a capital letter, they have some numbers. But a lot of these are known, and it's very easy for this advanced technology, not only that we can use, but also the attackers, to automate some of this and use the current version of, you know, summer is finally here. It's pretty warm outside today, in the current year. So I like to think of a sentence or a favorite movie quote or something, and then maybe pick out and develop some type of rule that works for you. For example, maybe it's the first letter of each word that you then take, and you remember that movie quote, and your rule is you take the first letter of each word and you construct a password, you know, or you can, you know, it's less safe, but you can kind of think of a part of a password that might be the same for everything, and then adjust the middle of it or the front of it or the back of it that might be unique to a service that you're using. So you always have the same first half of the password that's 8 characters long, but then you have a second half of the password that's unique and random to maybe something that you're using it for, to help you remember that. Again, I will preach using LastPass or a similar type of solution. I mentioned LastPass because it's free. We all like free. And then leverage that when you log into websites to generate that random password and then it will autofill it. But using those dictionary words that are easy to remember, your kids' names, your dogs' names, you post those on Facebook or on LinkedIn and that public site, those attackers know about that and they can see that. So they're likely to use that. Even more so with those challenge questions, what was the street I lived on in 3rd grade? Or what's my favorite kid's name? Well, you only have one kid. That might be an easy answer, depending on the research.
So with the password keeper, I know I use Google Chrome usually, and every time I go to log into something, Google gives me a random password and says, don't worry, you don't have to remember this, we'll do it for you. Mm-hmm. Should I trust the Google password keeper, or is it safer to use like LastPass or a different third party?
That's a fun one. If that's the one you prefer because it's easiest, yes, it's much more safer than using the same password across all your accounts. Being that it's built into the web browser, they can be accessed. So a separate one such as LastPass or 1Password, I could keep naming these, may be a little bit more secure, but if that's works for you, please do that. They can be extracted depending on the malware and stuff, which may do that. Because they're not protected by a separate password, they're kind of just there and the browser can read it. So if the browser can read it, anything running in the browser can access those, right? With LastPass, it's separate and it requires a separate master password to actually unlock that encrypted database.
Good to know. So another one that I saw when you were going through the slides of the data that you could just go on and buy, and people will help you do that, which is also crazy for me to learn. You said you've seen stuff as cheap as 30 cents. Is it really that easy to get that 30 cents is a return on the investment for people to go out and get that information?
Yeah. And usually the 30-cent ones, you're buying them in bulk to get that deal. But yeah, it's worth it. So if you pay $2 for an American Express card and you go out and buy a $400 TV, even if you leave it at that, that's a good return on investment, right? But more so, these people are doing it to either resell or to commit additional fraud and things to that nature. So you can go out on an anonymous web, the dark web, as they like to call it, right? And pay for credit cards that somebody else had already obtained and hacked. Minimizes your risk. So rather than go out and buy the malware or try to hack into something and potentially get caught, buying it and then using it does reduce your risk, which is why that's so popular. You can do it with minimal money, right? You can buy 1,000 cards at 30 cents a piece. Maybe those are American Express, right? You can buy Visa, MasterCard, and each of those have different security levels. So the price of those, differ. American Express ones, they are typically known to have some good fraud controls and the ability to just call and say, hey, this was fraud, please don't charge me. And they don't ask questions. So those are more difficult to use. Those are typically higher priced because there might be less of them, right? So there's just a lot of uniqueness to the business. It's really a business back there with the chats, the supports, the rating systems. It's different. It's unique.
Switching gears a little bit, what is the most easily preventable disaster that you have seen?
The most easily preventable disaster that I've seen. Passwords. Weak passwords get you a lot, or shared passwords. In this instance, I showed a picture of the remote desktop software because it's kind of pertinent to the times we're in now. not only was that open, the password to get into that machine was password, all lowercase. And it's pretty easy to find that on the internet and then guess that. And what that did, that allowed access to financial information. And since it was running there locally, they had direct access and they could make changes as much as possible, right? That's another big target for ransomware right now. But weak passwords on those services or on anything that's publicly accessible make it much easier and really using some of that hygiene, right? They don't have to put malicious software on your machine if they just logged into it to get to your bank account because it's sitting there, right? So the patching, the endpoint, things to that nature, that doesn't come into play there. So really your layer of protection is that password, which is why they're so important.
All right, note to self, go change all my passwords. Alrighty, well, I believe that is everything we have. So we're gonna have another fun moment where we switch the screen sharing. And I will share that, like I mentioned, this is part of a series. So we will have another one of these same kinds of events. Hopefully this one, we can all get together and have a cup of coffee, but who knows? We will be with Scott Fisher from McCrossin Consulting, who will be talking about how small to medium-sized businesses can manage their healthcare costs ahead of open enrollment. Before we go, I do one more time want to thank all of our sponsors, MediaCom Business, the City of Coralville, and Terry Lockridge and Dunn for supporting this event. We hope to continue it into the future. Like I said, we have recorded this. We'll be posting it on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing it with anybody that registered. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Brandon, for sharing your expertise and your time with us. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the day and the weekend.